Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve Podcast. Today's guest is a professional speaker and performance coach hailing all the way from Las Vegas in the United States. Her name is Patricia Barnett. Welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm well, Christian. I'm thrilled to be here too.
No, honestly, thank you for agreeing to do this. I can tell just by looking at everything I've researched into you that you're a very, very busy person. Let's just hop straight into it. So you do business mentoring, specifically in the field of personal and professional transformation. So what can you tell us about this? Because obviously these are buzzwords. These are things that people want to hear. But when it gets down to sort of the nitty gritty, how do you help people and businesses transform themselves?
There's a saying that I love so much. And the saying is that for things to change, we must change. So first and foremost, how I help people is to recognize that results on the outside are created first by what's happening on the inside. So Christian, you mentioned in business. Yes, I love helping people in business and in life because every area of our life, it all comes back. All roads lead to Rome. It all comes back to us. And so this is about developing self. I've been a student of self-development and human potential almost my whole life, and I've coached people for about the last 30 years. And what I have found for myself, it's not just coaching others, profound work for myself in understanding how we can develop ourselves to then create greater success in life in any area of life, but also greater happiness and joy and fulfillment so that we just want to run into the day. And Christian, when you and I started our conversation before we ever even got the ball rolling here, we were speaking about how the ups and downs of life happen. And where I really help people is how to be even keel no matter what's happening in our lives so that we are good to go no matter what life seems to throw to us.
As you were kind of outlining that, one thing that popped into my head that I got to ask, and it comes from the perspective of, as you said, if you want to change, you got to be the author of your change, and it's very difficult. Firstly, to acknowledge that, to own that, to understand that you have to change, and also it's difficult, I suppose, to accept that. For some people, maybe not. I mean, certainly, I think with businesses, it's a case of, well, we either change or we go out of business. So it's kind of that there is more of a, let's say, motivation to actually do, to make those steps forward, to reach out to someone such as yourself and actually make those moves, and also then to follow the instructions that you would actually give them. But one of the things I want to know is how much kind of pushback do you get from people and businesses? So obviously you sit down with these people and you're like, okay, tell me what the problem is. And they outline what their problem is and you kind of listen, take it on board, etc. And then you obviously, within the framework of what you do, you give them kind of your perspective on how they can change and what they can do. But inevitably, you must be sort of giving them criticisms here and there in a constructive manner, obviously, but you're going to kind of outline okay, these are your problems right here. And in that, do you get any pushback? Do you get any difficulty? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Christian, because where there are consultants that can come in and look at a business or even a person's life and say, okay, you need to put this in order and do this and change this and go here. We do a little bit of that, but as you said, it is all about how we're showing up, who we're showing up as, where our limitations lie. And many times people can't see their limitations. That's why that's one of the biggest challenges we have is that we can't see what we can't see. And many times it's like, imagine this, like a Post-it note on your back, stuck on your back. And in school, when I was little, we had notes that were taped to the back that said, kick me. And the person who had that note stuck to their back got kicked, but they couldn't figure out why they kept getting kicked. So what I do is I come in and I shine the spotlight, right? Shine the spotlight and take a peek of what's back here because many times people can't see it. And to your point, Christian, the pushback comes from people who are not willing to really, really, really be open, because there is a level of responsibility. Again, whether it's business or in life, like we can't figure out, why does life keep kicking me? Why do I feel like I keep getting kicked down the road, whether it's in business or in life? And I've had times like that in my life. I've been a student of this work, and yet where I have developed my muscles is by going through my process and living my process, and then ultimately creating a process so that I can help people, rise and thrive and elevate their results.
But how do you kind of defeat that initial stubbornness from people? Because obviously, as you've said, you've had to work to get to that point. It's a progress thing. I can say even in my own life, it's the sort of thing where actually recently, within the last year, I had a kind of stubbornness where I felt like, well, I'm up to this point. I've lived most of my 20s in this way, and I feel very mature. And then something just comes and knocks you off your let's say pedestal, and then you're back to square one again, and you're sort of reevaluating and working on things again.
Yeah.
Now, but the difference there is that, okay, taking myself as an example, I looked at that and realized, okay, this needs to change, and then you make the change. But then, as you kind of outlined before, people aren't always willing or able to even see that. They're ignorant of the fact. But initially, before you get those people to start actually complying and going through that framework and listening to you, how do you get through to them? Like, what's your process to kind of stop them or kick them out of being stubborn?
It's a great question. And what I do is I share with them what the process is, because there is a process to elevating. There's an absolute science to how this works. And I believe that it's so key, because if we don't know how this works, we're going to be stuck in the push-pull. We're going to be stuck in, like, the New Year's resolutions that people make at the beginning of the year, and they're with for about maybe 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks if they're lucky. And then they slide all the way back down, and then they say, resolutions don't work. Do you know, Christian, now, at least in the United States, but I'm believing around the world, there are less people now than ever that ever really create New Year's resolutions. Why? Because there's a belief that they don't work. And resolutions don't work if you don't know how they work, and if you can't work with them so that they do work, because I believe they can work, but not in the framework of mindset. So what I do is I really take people through what the process is, so they can realize, what is that resistance about? Because I was sitting down with a friend not long ago, and she was speaking to me about her own internal resistance to some things that she was wanting to make in her life. And she said, I just don't figure out what's happening, Well, here's what's happening. We think that we're the one resisting, when, Christian, we're not the ones resisting. It's the patterns. It's the way in which we've done it this far that is the resistance. That's where the resistance happens. It looks like us, feels like us, sure wants us to believe it's us. It's not. It's a pattern. So when we know we're working with patterns, when we know we're working with, old behaviors and habits, and when we know how then and what to look for in the transformation process, it makes the transformation so much easier and better, because it's fear that is the resistor.
Yeah, it's interesting with that one as well, because I find it does kind of depend a lot on the type of person you are as well. Like, one thing I've learned about myself with regards to this is that it's I have to kind of be presented with the consequences a few times before it kind of clicks. It depends what it is, like something like, let's say quitting smoking. I'm quite partial to a cigarette. And I find with that, it's actually very easy for me to just quit it, because it's just like, well, it kills you, it costs lots of money, it smells. I mean, there's barely any like real positives, to be honest. But like, when you find yourself in that pattern again, as you said, it's like, oh, okay, like, so clearly the way I did it last time didn't work. And, then you got to kind of, but speaking to my point, the reason I brought it up, like, when you're looking at those consequences and you find yourself in that moment again and again and again, eventually it gets to a point where it's kind of too much, you know, like, and if then that's when it forces you to do something. And some people, to be fair, can sort of just say, I'm going to change, and then they change, and then that's it. But I think that's more in the kind of the minute amount of people. I think the majority of people will probably sit in the middle somewhere where, you know, they could do it. Maybe they could even do it like a month or something, and then they start having problems. Like, for instance, I actually do think the whole New Year's resolution thing is kind of nonsense as well, but only from the perspective that if you're going to change, just do it now. Like, don't pick a date, just start now and work your way from this point. And don't get me wrong, you can like count and go, okay, it's been 30 days, it's been 2 months, and that's good. But like, there's no point setting yourself a date, because one thing I think we all tend to do is we keep pushing it. Like okay, let's take the smoking thing as an example, right? So let's say I say, okay, I'm gonna quit tomorrow. And then I quit tomorrow. And then a week from then I have a cigarette. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll start again in 2 days' time. And then it'll be like, and then you just, before you know it, you're not doing what you were supposed to do. You know?
That's it, Christian. First of all, you're exactly right. Every day is a new day. I believe that today, you know, today is a new day. It's a new dawn. There's a song, a new dawn, a new day, a new life. And it starts right here, right now. So our new year, it's the first day of the rest of our lives. Our new year starts today. So Christian, to your point, so we could say we're going to stop something, and some people can for however long they do, whether it's a week, to your point about the smoking, a month, or a lifetime. But here's the really important part. There are people who stop things, like let's take drinking as an example. People can stop drinking and they can stop the drinking, but if they don't go to the thinking that started the drinking, then they don't drink, but they still have the same life as though they did. They still have the same anxieties, or they still have the same numbing out. They'll find something different. Maybe they won't drink, but then they'll find something to replace it. So it is all about going inside. So we can stop the habit and we cannot do that thing, and only until we really get inside and figure out where that came from and why, and stop the pattern, the behavior, and the thinking pattern coming from a different mindset, will that really be gone. So someone can stop drinking, and people who stop drinking but do not stop the thinking that caused the drinking, there's a name for them. They're called a dry drunk. They're not drinking, but they still have the same mindset. They still have the same heart set. They still have the same self-image. And yet it doesn't create any more happiness, freedom, or new direction in their life. So we can stop the habit. You know, it's been said that if you want to stop smoking, this is what's been said. If you want to stop smoking, you don't have to try to stop smoking. Just never put cigarettes up to your lip and inhale ever again in your life. That's how you stop smoking, right? That's how others have said that's how you stop. You just don't do it anymore. To your point, Christian, we start today, we just don't do it anymore. But there is a behavior that creates the habit, and that's my work, is going in and getting to the spot of what is it that really creates that? What is it? And usually it's something that we can't even see for ourselves. So when I mentioned that resistance comes from fear, it's fear of change or fear that things will be different. Like, I'm not going to be able to have my cigarette with my coffee in the morning, right? I know it's not good, but it's about going inside and changing there. And Christian, would you believe that there is a study where even people who were diagnosed with lung cancer, like if you smoke another cigarette, it is going to be the closure of your coffin. And even then, that does not motivate some people to even quit. So it's about what's the motivating factor, and going deeper inside. And that's the work that I do.
It's just, yeah, it's a tricky one with smoking, because smoking for me is my Achilles heel. Like, I can easily not touch I'm not even bothered about alcohol, to be honest. Like, whatever, I can go on a night out, and I love my coffee. I think that's probably like an addiction for me. But smoking is like that kind of like forbidden fruit. It's almost like as you said, like coffee and a cigarette, something. Like, it's always better in small doses, but even that one is just too much. You know what I mean? It's and I know that, and we all know that, it's
We
bad
all
for
know
you and
it.
stuff.
We all know it, but why do we do it? Christian, why do we do it?
Because it's so good. That's why.
Christian, we all have it, whether we call it a cigarette, whether we
Yep.
call it potato chips, whether we call it numbing out watching TV, whether we call it social media. Everyone has their Achilles heel. And that's really what is pretty profound, even when we recognize that. When you're speaking about taking people through the process, recognizing everyone has one.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of our journey in moving through life, is knowing that everyone is going to have circumstances that really are hard. Everyone's going to have to overcome something. Everyone has an Achilles heel. Everyone, even Clark Kent, even Superman, right, had an Achilles heel called kryptonite. So we all have one. It's just now, how do we move beyond it and go above it and overcome it? And Christian, here's the news of the day. Are you ready? Fasten your seatbelt. It generally has nothing to do with the thing we think it does. So that's why diets don't work. It's like, I call it wrestling in the alligator pit with alligators, right? So even alligator wrestlers, those people that go in and wrestle alligators, is that a thing where you are? Have you heard of that, right? Like in the US?
I've heard of it. Yeah, I can't believe that people do that.
People go in and wrestle alligators, and even alligator wrestlers can lose their life going in the pit.
No, really?
I've had, so would you and I go in the pit? You and I wouldn't even go in the pit. Alligators wrestlers sometimes don't make it out of the pit.
Jeez.
So I had a woman one day and said, Patricia, tell me what I can do to arm myself before I go in, basically, the alligator pit. And I looked at her and I said, here's how you arm yourself. Don't go into the alligator pit. If you want to make sure that you survive, don't go to war. And what I mean is, don't go into the alligator pit. So, how do we think about that differently? It's knowing that it has not a lot to do with the diet or the potato chips or the alcohol or the smoking or the cigarettes, or it's deeper. So now we're looking at, okay, so do we need psychiatry and psychology? Do we need to go back to when we were 4 and what happened then? No, it's about activating a different part of our brain and focusing on something different. Because if we're focusing on the cigarettes, we're focusing on the cigarettes. If we're focusing on the potato chips, and how do I not eat those potato chips? Again, you just don't put them in your mouth. But wow, how do those bags show up in my pantry? So it's about activating a different part of our brain rather than trying to go into the part that's making that so seductive. We don't want to stay there. That's the alligator pit. We want to open up a new part of our brain, a new neural pathway, and create new tracks. If we create new tracks of thinking and behavior, we'll create new tracks of how we live, our habits and our results.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe you're right on that. Well, you would know more than me. Like, I'm just, but I mean, I don't know. Whenever I look at that, like, for example, you talk about allure and the desire to have this thing, and you desperately want it and whatever. And like for instance, when I think about, like, one thing I like to have sometimes is just like takeaways. I'm quite bad for that, and I know I shouldn't keep doing it. And in that moment, just before, I find myself just going, screw it. And that right there is choice. I mean, I know that I shouldn't do that, and I know it's bad for me, and it's a waste of money, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's like, I don't know. I feel like certain things, it comes down to more a case of just discipline, working on discipline, maybe more than anything else. Like obviously that's going to tie into what you were saying before about building new ways of thinking and stuff. I totally get that. But I think that a key aspect of this is principally just working on your discipline, like your ability to just say no when you get offered things, or if you have the opportunity to, repeat a behavior, you shouldn't. It's like,
yes. Yes, you're right on. You're right on with that, Christian. The difference is where we say no is if we're saying it from the side that has the allure in it, or are we saying it from the side that wants to create freedom? And again, if we're saying it from the side that's wanting the allure, then we're again back in the alligator pit. So you are spot on, is that it comes down to awareness. It comes down to thinking instead of just in the moment getting caught up and then taking the action like it's not going to really make a difference. There's a lot more involved. And you mentioned it, Christian, like sometimes people, it's also part of the process that sometimes it doesn't stick right away. And the moment it doesn't stick, and we'll just use the smoking, for example, the moment it doesn't stick and we have that cigarette, now the judge comes in, you failed miserably. You have failed, you're never going to do this, it's not going to work. And then that's where we have lost all power. When in fact, that's part of the process. You may have a cigarette, it may not stick, but the point is, it is so that it doesn't happen as often. And when it happens, you get right back on track. That's part of the game. That's part of the play. That's part of the playbook, right? So when we think we're going to just go for perfect results and we're never going to smoke again in our life, we set ourselves up for such failure. And in fact, that's the sabotage that wants to come in, the self-sabotage that wants to come in for us to believe we'll never overcome or never move past or never rise above and go beyond.
I totally agree. Yeah, I think it's about kind of like trying to create the life where that behavior no longer exists in it, and it's all like the life afterwards or whatever. And yeah, that is a process. That's just not going to happen straight away. Like when you hear people say like, oh, why don't you just give up drinking? Why don't you just do this? And obviously that, excuse me, does come down to ignorance and, not realizing that it's a hard thing to overcome. But it's also, as you said, it's not just about the thing itself or the willingness to accept that you have a problem and you need to work on it. It's like consistency and keeping going to those meetings, for example, or, you keep repeating the processes that you've learned and whatever. And it's like getting used to that behavior. And it's like anything. I mean, I think like the weird thing about us humans is that we recognize that we need to change. We know that. And we know that life is all about change. And yet we still try to resist it as much as we possibly can. Like it's almost like we're all just born really stubborn. Don't get me wrong. Some people are a bit more open-minded to change and realize and embrace it. But I think we definitely all have that feeling initially, like, oh, really? Like, I'll give you an example. Something really small, minute, but it demonstrates the point. Like, one of my housemates is moving out this month, and I just really like the guy. And I'm like, okay, because I know everything's going to change. The vibe will be different. Someone new will move in. He'll move away. Let's face it, you say you're going to stay in touch, but you never do. It's just how life is. Things happen. Sometimes you do, but life. And I said this to my other housemate, and he's like, yeah, I know, it is what it is. And I'm just like, I wish it wouldn't be like that. And, and we're just saying all stuff that we know. It's not even like we're really trying to reassure each other or be like, oh, it'd be all right. It's just, we both know, because we're both old enough, like now, close to 30. We've embraced that. We know that that's the case, but it doesn't stop it from not wanting it, not like being comfortable. And then the funny thing about change, especially with bigger things, is that you can never really anticipate it. It never comes at a convenient time, or like it just happens, and you've got to do your best to work around it and embrace it.
Yeah, pretty profound, Christian. Change is always happening. That's the one thing that stays constant is change. Change is always happening. And I'm probably at the front of the line in the brigade to not like change. I don't like change. I like things steady. I like things to stay the same. I don't love change until I realize, wait a minute, for things to change, we must change. We have to have change. So part of the process is once we realize that when we embrace it versus fight it, it is so much easier. And that actually gives us the lift to help to rise above and go beyond any of that stuff that comes up when change happens. This morning, I have a new coaching certification class because I do continuing education. So I just started something this morning, and I've been in it for 7 weeks, and they just upgraded us this morning. And when I went to my app, everything was gone. Everything changed. It was not where it used to be. And for me, it's like scrambling me, right? I call it the shaken snow globe. It's like shook me, right? But when we realize, this is for the good. So that's a process. That's a muscle. That's a muscle to build, to realize, see, change happens. I don't like change. When change happens, I'm going to get shaken for a second, and then I'm going to be able to know how to bring myself back to then navigate the change. That's a muscle that we can build. And to your point, Christian, only until people are knocked down or shaken enough will they desire the change. And once they are in the midst of the change, the key is to know the process, stay with it, and work with somebody. If we could do it on our own, we would have done it already on our own. So this is why, I'm a big advocate for coaches, not because I am one, but because for about the last 30 years, I've had one or two or three. Right now, I have 3 coaches that I work with. Not because I'm, remedial. I've been working on this. But because I have a desire to really rise, I now am dedicated to how far can I go? What is my potential? Because what I know is the deeper I go into my potential, the more people I can help reach theirs.
I had a different question in mind, but I will just continue that point. I think I've had quite a few different guests on the show in, let's say various different sort of lines of work to yourself, like for instance, like therapists, psychologists, etc. And they all seem to have this you all have this thing in common of like, even though I might be an expert in my field, I'm still going to learn. I'm still going to have people teach me. And I find that like a really fascinating concept. Like, for instance, I had a guest on the show once who was a relationship counselor, and she'd been doing it for like 30 years. And she was still getting marriage counseling for her marriage, even though they were happily married and had been for a long time. And she said, like, it's just good to kind of keep it going and just kind of like she found positives in it. And I just looked at that like it's just a different way of approaching it, really. And it keeps it in a positive space and it allows for growth. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? I think we get to a certain point where we feel very comfortable with things and we feel like we kind of know it all. And of course, that's nonsense. We know nothing. There's always things to learn. But I don't know. I just find that whole concept interesting in a nutshell. But one thing I did want to kind of ask you about with regards to change, or at least sort of talk to you about, is this idea that, yes, change is something we have to embrace and it's inevitable and it's a part of life. But see, what do you do when things don't change for the better? They change for the worse. Now, I'll say my opinion on this before I hand over to you, is that I've kind of found myself understanding that you have to get to a point where you don't panic when things go bad and you try your very best to like continue being yourself and continue being calm during that, that time. But the thing I want to know from you is, let's say that period lasts longer than we expected. Let's say it's not a short-term thing, like it lasts 6 months, a year. What do you do in those situations? How do you keep going?
Oh my gosh, this is a really this is a big question. And it's a great one. It's really a great one because it's very much of what we spoke about coming in, is that things will happen. We have these ups and downs. And when we speak about change right now in our world, we are in the midst of some of the most profound changes and some of the most rocky times that we've ever lived, ever in our lifetimes. And we're all doing it at the same time. It's not just one country or one set of people. Everyone on the globe right now is in the midst of a major reset. And that's change. That's change. So it comes down to this idea that it's who we're showing up as, who we're being, no matter what's happening around us. And where many may think that, okay, Patricia, sounds good. Maybe you were just born positive. I want to share with you the reason that I believe so wholeheartedly in what I do and why staying calm, especially in the midst of chaos, is so important, is because of some of the opportunities I've had in my own life. 20 years ago, I was diagnosed with a life-threatening disease.
Wow.
I was 30 years old, and at the peak, like the prime professionally, I was at the top of my game. And I had been working with a coach for business development and then diagnosed. And it was as if in a day, in a moment, like the rug felt like it got pulled right out from under me. Like everything just wasn't supposed to be happening to me. And that was something that in a very short time span, a big thing happened. And so it wasn't going to change overnight. And so how did I? What I'm hearing you say is, when we have big things happen, what look like out there, how do we keep our footing? How do we keep our grounding? And a lot of it has to do with mindset. It has to do with, where will we be? How will we set ourselves up? Who will we show up as while we're going through this? That adventure, that journey for me lasted about 1.5 years. And so when I had ultimately come down to a doctor say, where you are in this, you better go home and pray for a miracle, because the chances of making it are much slimmer than the alternative, like a narrow margin to make it to the other side. And fortunately, I'd been working in this area. I'd been working in this arena. I'd been working with a coach in a formula for success as it related to business. And in business, I didn't have a business degree. I didn't even have a college education. I didn't have business experience. And yet I made it to the top of a company and an entire industry in 2 years. So we knew that that formula worked for that. And then when this diagnosis happened, my husband and I sat together and we thought, okay, if it created those kind of results in that area of life, wonder what that formula would do in this area of life. And you mentioned it, Christian, the idea that when we are going through some really rocky times, one of the very first, whether we're trying to change smoking to a healthy lifestyle, or whether we're wanting the edge so that we can stay alive, the number one key is vision. Creating a vision of what could be possible, a vision of what and where we could be on the other side of all of this, and then coming from the vision. So it's not just hoping, like Pollyanna, I hope that I live to tell about it. The moment that that doctor said that to me, and again, I had some muscles built. So I already had some muscles built. I already worked with a coach. But the moment that doctor said that to me, I had two choices. I could buy into his belief, or I could create my own. And my husband said to me, will you buy into his belief? Because if I bought into his belief, the chances of me not being here 20 years later would be far different. Belief. And where will we set ourselves up? So I immediately created a belief that, hey, even if he told me it wasn't possible, I knew that I had a source that I believed in that was a miracle worker, that I could be one of the first. Even if a doctor told me, you have zero chance, I would believe in miracles. Because otherwise, I might as well just exit stage left, right? So I created a vision. And in that moment, it was easy because all I had to ask myself is, where will I be on the other side of this? And I created a vision for where I would be on the other side of this, which again was one of the hardest, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, one of the hardest things I've ever been through in my life. And so how did I do it? That's what people ask me. How did you do it? Is that mindset and mental fitness. And then I showed up, and then I did the things necessary to move through. And what I knew is that whether I made it or I didn't, then all would be well. So there was a sense of being really quite relaxed through the process because my faith was so high, in knowing that no matter what, all would be well. So to your question, things happen. Like, why does it get worse before it gets better? Christian, things get worse many times before they get better, even where we are on the globe right now and in the planet and where we are in the world. When we take a 40,000 foot view and realize that some of the things that are happening, my belief is that we could believe that only bad can happen from this, or we could believe that there could be good. There could be, even if we could just be slightly open to the fact that there could be good here. And how will we mine this time to be a part of that? How will we mine this time? Who will we be? How will we show up? What will we do to be part of the solution, even if we're not exactly where in the world things are happening? We have the opportunity, you and I today in this conversation have the opportunity to create a brighter space and place. And again, I'm very aware, I'm hearing people like, oh, just positive thinking, just you being happy is going to make a difference. Yeah, it's the beginning. So it is a much deeper conversation, but to your question, what happens when all hell breaks loose and it looks like we might not make it out alive? Is create a mindset, create a vision. And here's the most important thing about vision. Our results, this is big. Fasten your seatbelts, everyone. Our results are determined by how we show up. Not just what happens to us, but how we will show up in the midst of what's happening. That's what creates the results finally on the outcome. So when I was diagnosed initially, someone said, it's not what happens to you, it's what you take from what's happening and what you will create from what's happening and how you will use it for the good. And that's how each and every one of us have a ability in this moment. How will we take what's happening to us and how will we mine the good and create this for the betterment of all, for ourselves and for all? So that's an awfully long answer, Christian, to your question, but did that help? From my perspective of how we can move through times in which we find very challenging, it comes back to how we can set ourselves up every day and come from that calm confidence. I call it a calm confidence, so that no matter what's happening in the world, no matter what's happening in our life, the moment we can begin to believe it's possible that good could come from this and then get interested in the good that could come, that is then the path in which we're on. Not fight it, embrace it, and find the good in it. Mm-hmm.
Wow. All I can say is it's amazing. And thank you so much for sharing. I know for a fact that everyone listening will be very inspired by that. I think that it's especially difficult in a situation like that to not give in to fear and to realize, okay, I need to do something about this. And, you know, I'll address some of what you said. I don't think it's very difficult for me to follow this, but I'll do my best. You'd already got yourself up to that point, you know, clearly, you know, you would have faced a lot of difficulties getting to the top, because, you know, business is hard, you know, business is ruthless. It's a special kind of beast, and, you know, you got to be tough and you got to be resilient, and that's what got you the success when you got to that point. At that point, then to be told something like that, I mean, as you say, it does kind of come down to two choices. It's like, well, do I give up or do I keep going? And it's like, the thing that amazes me most with everything that you said, and, you know, just putting myself in your shoes for a second, the most amazing thing I think about that is the strength and courage you showed to continue going despite it being scary. And obviously certain things are going to help, like having a support network, having the husband there, having family, friends, colleagues, whatever it takes, you know, that's fundamental. And we will always draw on these things when we're in a period where we need that kind of support. We reach out, that's what we do. But I think you're incredible for showing such courage and determination to keep going through that. And I think it's even more amazing that you applied a business concept to that. That's unheard of. And I gotta dig a little deeper with this, because I know that you've got this how can I put it? It's like a 7-step program that you've developed. Is that the same thing, or is that like the beginnings of that and then you kind of created that later on? Like, talk to us about this kind of approach that you used, not only to address that tough time in your life, but then continuing from that to where you are now.
Yeah. Wow. It's another great question. You are good. You're good, Chris. You asked some really terrific questions. Well, first of all, the coach that I mentioned that I was working with, he was a coach that at one time was a professional football player for the Miami Dolphins. So he had gone to the Super Bowl. He was the captain at the Super Bowl, and very successful in that profession. And then when he left football, and by the way, he was coached under a coach by the name of Don Shula. Some may know of Don Shula. He's one of the greats as it relates to coaching in football history back in the day. And so the coaching that I received had a lot to do with the champion mindset. In fact, it had almost everything to do with the champion mindset. So it was that champion mindset that we applied to business. And it was within that it was not so much about those to-dos, and yet there was a lot to do. It had everything to do with what we've been speaking about. So as he coached me, and then as we recognized, wait a minute, that's champion mindset. Well, to get through a diagnosis and that kind of prediction from a doctor, we're going to need a champion mindset to get to the other side. Because if there's a book written by a colleague and a friend of mine who's no longer here alive, but he wrote a book that said if the how-tos were enough, we'd all be skinny, rich, and happy. Because we know how to, right? We know how to, right? We just don't put the cigarette to our lips. We know how, we just don't put the chip in our mouth. No, if the how-tos were enough, we'd all be thriving, we'd all be happy, we'd all be skinny, we'd all be rich, we'd all have nothing to worry about. So in recognizing, one of those most topsy-turvy times in my life, and yes, I was working with this coach to achieve what I had, but my topsy-turvy didn't start just right at the time in which I was diagnosed. I had had some opportunities to rise above other times in my life as well.
Right.
So my journey of self-development just didn't start because I was so interested in self-development, although it was, I think that some of the greatest masters have gone through some of the greatest stuff. It's why we can accelerate and elevate to become, to be in this conversation, because we've been through it. It's not just because I had an easy life that I can help people have better lives. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've noticed that again and again, and I used to think it was coincidence, but now, I'm not. It's true. The more you go through, the more it kind of helps you to build, resilience and understanding, and it is a choice. It's a choice of, am I a victim or am I a survivor, or and don't get me wrong, I know I'm making it sound easier than it is. Trust me, I realize it's not as simple as just making the decision. It's a profound thing. You make that decision, and then you build upon that. And for instance, if you've gone through something really traumatic, you kind of build from that point onwards, and you're like, okay, I'm going to build my strength. I'm going to help other people. I'm going to not let this defeat me. As you said, have the champion's mindset, and build upon that and move forward with your life. But it's a journey, and it's tricky. And, when I look at my own life, for instance, I often try to channel my difficult times into things that I do. So like, if I'm going through a hard time, I put it into music, or I channel it into a performance of some description, or whatever the case may be. I mean, sometimes it sounds unhealthy, but it's just my way of dealing with things. If it gets really bad, I just bury my head in work, stay busy, keep myself busy, have some sort of a purpose. I think, especially with some of those addictions that we were discussing earlier, things like drinking a lot, or drugs in general. I mean, obviously, inevitably people are going to say, oh, well, it's a coping mechanism. Sometimes it can be because we have too much time on our hands. As crazy as that sounds, my advice generally, and I know it won't work for everyone, but whenever people ask me for advice, like when they're going through a difficult time, I just say, stay busy. Find yourself stuff to do, and get in the business of doing things. And it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't have, like, when you say that, people assume you mean like work. It doesn't have to just mean work. It can mean just, okay, well, I'm going to make sure to clean my house every single day, or make the bed every single day, and get myself out and go for a walk every day. And, you fill your day up with things. And then by the end, you don't have time to sit down and like feel bad. But here's the thing. This is an important caveat. You can't avoid that stuff either. You've got to sit down and work through that stuff eventually, either with a therapist or by yourself, or whatever works for you. But it's all about getting into that headspace where you're able to do that. Until we're in that headspace, often that's where we fall off, and we end up doing things like having a drink. Like, for example, I mean, I'm not big on drinking, as I said earlier, but I'm prone to it sometimes if I feel bad. And I know how stupid that is, because alcohol is a depressant. And if you feel depressed already, it's going to make it 10 times worse. And yet you still go into that thinking, oh, well, whatever, like, I'm going to do this and get out. And I don't know, you convince yourself of things that are unlikely, like, oh, maybe I'll go out to this bar and I'll meet someone and it'll be great. And it's like, really? Will that really happen? No. And not so much because you don't have luck, or those things never happen to me, or whatever. No, it will be because you have the wrong mindset. You're not, as you say, in that positive headspace. But it's so much more than that. Like, I think when people hear the word positivity, being positive, and I've said this before, so my listeners probably bored of me saying this, but I said this years ago that, I used to be a negative person, really negative. And at a young point in my life as well, I was in my late teens, early 20s, at a time when you'd think, oh, he's got his life ahead of him. Surely you'd be excited. No, I was depressed. I hated my life. And a lot of that came down to fear, not pursuing the things I should have been pursuing at the time, feeling unfulfilled, low self-esteem, etc., etc., etc. Right? But the key thing that was holding me back was that negative mindset, because it's not like there wasn't positive people around. There were a few here and there, and they were like a breath of fresh air, and they would say things and I knew they were right, but I'd be like, oh yeah, whatever, that's never going to happen. Oh yeah, whatever, and then something just snapped where, and this was my point of reckoning, where I just got so sick and tired of being depressed that I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna go and do something. And I think I went to some gig somewhere at some place that was familiar to me, and I met a friend. I made a friend that night, and then things kind of spiraled from there. I toured with her band a little bit, went to America for a little bit, did all these different things in the space of that year, and slowly my mindset began to change, very slowly. And then incidentally, that was the year that I eventually went to university as well. So it wasn't straight away, but there was something that needed to happen in order for me to get to that point and do something about it. But it was a journey, and it took a bit of time. And, I wouldn't have even said that I was immediately positive. It's just I started to think more positively. So when people would present ideas to me or opportunities would come my way, instead of going, that won't work, that's stupid, I'd be like, let's give it a try. Let's see what happens. I don't know. I've never tried. Like right now, that's my approach. Even if I feel like, oh, that won't work, I'm like, well, how do you know? You haven't tried. So try.
Yeah. It's about staying open. And Christian, that's a muscle. That's a muscle. So this idea that affirmations, if I just tell myself, right, I'm skinny, I'm rich, I'm happy, I understand why positive thinking gets a bad rap, because that's not going to change anything. I guess ultimately one day it could cause us to be open to want to believe it, but to the point of believing that it could be possible, that's where the change and that's where the positivity begins to take shape. And that's where the muscle begins to get developed. And then once we have that muscle, to your point, when we're open and we can think about, even if our initial is, I'm not going to make it. Doctor just said that, I'm not going to make it. But wait, what if? Because if we go down that track, we're done. But what if? And you just made that decision, you just made that switch. Let's be open. It's a muscle. It's a muscle to be developed. And it's like, I remember being in the gym and somebody said, now I was doing this arm exercise and they said, now really feel that tricep. And it's like, tricep, I don't think I was born with a tricep. I don't have a tricep. Same thing with abs. I don't think I was born with abs. We're all born with it. It's just, is it developed? Have we developed it? Do we know how to develop it? Can we find it within? So everybody has that ability. This is where the mindset and performance coaching comes in, because everybody has the ability, the capability, and yet not everybody knows how to access it. So Christian, as you were mentioning, so the mindset started to change. Sometimes it can change quicker than other times. The point is to turn ourselves and be open to it. And this idea of, do we want to go this way? Do we want to go this way? Somebody asked me, even in the time in which I was diagnosed, they said, what do you believe that your chance of surviving will be? Jesus. And I said this, you're going to love this, because at the time this was true for me. The time it was true for me, because this is where my mind was set. And this is what I said, I don't want to survive. I want to thrive. I didn't come here to survive. I didn't go through this just simply to survive. I came through this to come out on the other side stronger, better, bigger, and not in those words specifically. But when we think about it, we come into a circumstance and then it looks like we hit the skids. And then many people just want to get out of that and go back to where they were. No. Even in the world today, we come in, we hit the skids. What would it look like to rise above and go beyond and come out even better on the other side? So when we look at no matter what happens, because all of us have our stories, that's just one of my stories, right? Like, how do we find the pony in the big pile of manure? Everybody's going to have a big pile of manure. Hey, we're in a big pile of manure worldwide right now. Everybody's living in a big pile of manure, no matter where you're living, no matter where you are in the world, we're all in a big pile of manure right now. So the question is, would you be willing to find the pony in it, right? Because if there's a big pile of manure, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere. And that was a story that my dad told me when I was 8, that, two little boys, both in a room filled with manure. They were identical twins. Scientists wanted to see how they would react to the circumstance. One was mad as hell. Put me in a big pile of manure. This was the worst day of my life. The other one was playing in the manure, happy as could be. And when they went to that little boy, they said, "What are you doing in this big pile of manure?" And the little boy said, "Well, with this much manure, this is the greatest day of my life. There's got to be a pony in here somewhere." And that is the story in which I have led my life. Not since I was 8, but since I realized what that story really means. There's got to be a pony in here somewhere. So even through that diagnosis that I share, the idea that what could be the good, where could I mine the good, what could be the good that could come from this, and Christian, the good that came from it, was I got to see very clearly why I'm here. I believe that if I went through what I went through, and if I was able to help one person in their life, then it would have been a journey worthwhile. And Christian, to your question a little while ago, in that journey, that's where I was able to really see how all of this works and to recognize how we can find ourselves to a different space and place, get to the other side of wherever we are, because everybody's got their stuff. Everybody's got their stuff they're living in or have lived in. And the idea is, what could be a formula for success to go through it, rise above it, and go beyond it? And that's what I created in the program called Elevate. And so that is what I teach. That is how I coach. That is, there's a framework where we begin the process of really knowing the formula. It's like I give you the recipe to bake a cake, and you have the recipe, and now we go into the kitchen and now we start baking cakes until we're really good at baking cakes. And that's where the mastery resides. So whether it's an Elevate, a program I have Elevate, I work with clients one-on-one, and then we take it up a notch or two to mastery. Results mastery, how to really create the results that we would love to create. And most importantly, there's a saying that it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And it is about creating results, right? How we have this blank canvas called this year, what will you and I create, right? We have this book that has yet to be written in the rest of this year and beyond, and you and I are the authors. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that comes in that we would never have put in that chapter, but ultimately we're the authors of that book of life. And so that's the work that I do, and that's what I am here to do, and really help people tap into their truest potential to rise above, go beyond, and live happier, healthier, more fulfilling lives of joy, and no matter what comes our way. So it's not a Pollyanna approach of just thinking positive, being positive. It's about running to the day, being so passionate about living this day to be fully alive, that that champion mindset. What can we create in this day for ourselves and others?
What have been your kind of biggest success stories so far in terms of helping businesses, people? Like, what are the kind of most memorable
Mm,
instances that stand out where you were able to really help someone or an entity, a company transform themselves?
yeah. It's a brilliant question, because where I help people really focus in business, the results that come back, the fruit of it, has so much to do with relationships, with passion for living, with health and wellness. And for me, it's like planting the seeds in a garden and watching all these beautiful flowers bloom. That's really, when I work with people, that's what I see, is we plant all these seeds and then watch these extraordinary results happen in every area of life, whether it's personally, whether it's relationally, whether it's just the peace and freedom. I would say the number one theme has to do with freedom, living a life fully free, right? Like being free. There's this idea that, it's like we all are in these little prisons that we built for ourselves, or that have been built for us in one way or the other. And so this idea of really breaking free. But specifically, let's think, so many people who, because it's about designing the life you'd love to live, so many people literally redesigning their life, moving to different cities, going into different works, and building businesses that thrive, for sure. But I'll tell you, one that's coming to mind is I had a client who, we were working in business. And as we sat down and I did the intake session just to see how every element of her life was, she said, "Before we get started, I just want to tell you that my husband and I are getting a divorce, and there's nothing that's going to change that. And I just need you to know, as my coach, that I'm also dealing with this stuff on the side, because we were just there for business. And that's what's happening for me." They are now happier than they've ever been. They didn't end up getting the divorce. She sold her business, which was part of her plan, and now retired in a beautiful place on the coast, living a life that she could have only dreamed about or imagined before we worked together. So that's just one that comes to mind, but that's pretty indicative of the results when I work with people, that they step into a life of their dreams, and one that they absolutely love living, that they wake up every day, it's just like, pinch me, am I dreaming? Even when the world has gone nuts. even in the way in which the world is today, they're living lives of their dreams, and loving every day that they're alive.
How has your work and your line of work helped your personal relationships? So like with your husband, your children, etc. Like how has it helped you benefit?
So it's really fun. That's really brilliant, Christian. How it's helped me is, what I know is that anyone who is before me is there as my teacher too. It's feedback. I get to learn because I get to witness, and I get to, for me personally, anything that I share with a client, or that in my group coaching programs, anything I ask of another, I would never ask of another if I'm not doing it myself. So when I can recognize others and the challenges they're having, and I share with them the help that I could bring them, shine the spotlight, I also take that spotlight and I look at, see how it is for me, what's happening in my life. If I just shared that to help someone, is that information that can apply for me? And so, there's a client that I'm going to be with a little later today, and I'm very aware of what we're going to be speaking about today. And I get to sit with that even before we go into our session, and ask and look and see, where might that apply for me? And so when I share anything with anyone, I do my very best to see how I can put that into play in my own life. Where am I in my life? Am I really walking the walk, or am I just talking the talk? And it was about 20 years ago, I decided, you know what, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to show up to be the best that I can be, to create a life that I love living. And it's not about perfection. I still have stuff happen in my life. I still have, I'm human. And yet, who will I become in the midst of it? Will I rise or will I fall? And if I start to take a free fall, I catch myself and rise again. And that's the work that I bring. So it's helped me in my relationship with my husband. To your point about the woman who still wants to grow her relationship, we're in a very, very, very pivotal time of change, and things are elevating. And I believe that those who believe they've gotten thus far on whatever they've done previously will get lost if they don't keep going to the gym, so to speak, in every area of their life. There are really, really, really successful Fortune 100 CEOs that have made it to the top. They've done very well. And we're now entering into a time where this mindset, this going within, this expansion, inner expansion, will be imperative to continue moving forward. If they don't do it, they'll get lost in the shuffle. So we can never just rest on our laurels like we've come this far and we're there. It doesn't work that way. We've come this far, and guess what? Today, we're now opening the door for where we go from here. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more with that.
Yeah, and if somebody's like, well, wait a minute, I must have just, I'm not on the train. I must have missed the train. Because Patricia's like, she's on a super shuttle and I must have missed the super shuttle. No. Wherever someone is in this moment is exactly where they are to be in this moment. And in this moment, there is an opportunity to decide that they're open and they'd love to go beyond. And in this moment is when we can decide, where would we love to be on the other side of this? And then believe it could be possible. Start to come from that, live within it, take the actions necessary. And when we get off track, come back on track. Remind ourselves. Start to go this way, come back to center. Christian, in this time, it's a time in which people can be very fear-filled. And as I mentioned in the story that I shared 20 years ago, I've had people say, how did you do that so fearlessly? Even people who were with me, they're like, how did you do that? There was just no fear. It's not true. There was fear. It's just the ability to look at fear straight in the face the fear, and move forward anyway. It wasn't that I didn't have fear. Fear sneaked in, and especially in the middle of the night when it's dark, fear can come in and try to get a hold of us. It's not the idea that fear won't exist. It's the idea that when the fears rise, what will we do with that? How will we navigate it? And how will we look it straight on, head on, and keep moving forward anyway? That's the sign of courage. And so was there courage? Yes. And right now, more than ever, is courage needed, is faith needed, is trust in the process needed, and a vision of what could be possible on the other side of where anybody is in this moment. That's the direction. That's the focus. That's the first things first. What could it look like? And would I believe it? And would I just decide for it today? That's the beginning of the journey.
So what are the things you tell yourself when you feel fear? Like when you were dealing with that, what did you keep telling yourself? How did you keep going?
so I could recognize it was fear. And I recognized it as an opponent, and I recognized it as what it was. We've heard the acronym before, false evidence appearing real. It appeared really real. And there was a time in which I was 5 years old, where when I was falling asleep one night and opened up my eyes, in the corner of my room, I could see what looked like a monster. It scared me to death. Like, I'm still alive, but it was scary. 5 years old, very scary. And looked like a monster standing in my room. And I yelled for my mother. I cried out and I cried. And my mom rushed in. And I said, there's a monster in the corner. And she turned on the light. And there was no monster. And she said, go back to sleep. She left the room. And I saw it again. And she rushed back in. And this time she didn't turn on the light. She just said, show me, where's the monster? And I said, it's in the corner. And what was in the corner was a coat rack. That day, my mother and I had been shopping, and she bought me a balloon and tied it to my coat rack. So there was a balloon and my coat rack. And when the lights were turned off, it looked like a monster. It was my imagination. Fortunately, my mother was there to then turn on the light and show me what this monster really was. It was false evidence appearing real. Now we can see that. And once my mother showed me what it was, then I could realize that's just a figment of my imagination. And when fears come, they really are a figment of our imaginations. And so now what I do is I share with myself, I coach myself, and I surround myself with people who don't believe in monsters. And especially back then, you asked, how did I do it then? Is I surrounded myself with people who didn't believe in monsters. And I recognized from the story when I was little, oh, wait, turn the light on. That is not real. And looking at it in the face, monster, you are not real. Fear, you're not even real. You want me to believe this. You want me to go down. You want me to have drama. You want me to be upset. You want me to be rattled. I'm not going to do it. Not going to do it. And I'm human. Can I be afraid? Yes, I can. And then this is where I have this conversation. I have a dialogue with the fear. No, I'm not going there. I'm going to stay on my track and believe, trust and faith, and be open to all things possible. Mm-hmm.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing. What's the best advice you've ever received?
I've received some really good advice, but the one that's coming to me that I think is here for all of us in this moment of time, I'm moved. Like, this has just touched my heart. I'm moved at the soul level. The best that I've ever received is to not fight a circumstance. My coach, when I was diagnosed, my business coach, and I called him and I said, I'm mad as hell. This isn't supposed to be happening. You know, I just was so mad. And he said, Patricia, don't fight this. Don't fight this. Embrace it. Find the good within it. Rise above and go beyond it. And when he said these words, Christian, the type of diagnosis I received was one that we have this idea that we're going to fight against cancer. Let's fight it. Anything you fight pushes back, creates more of it. Greatest advice he gave me. And I said to him, I thought we were supposed to be fighting this. And he said, if you fight this, to the conversation we just had earlier, basically you'd be going into the alligator pit and you would be up against a real opponent that you may not make it out of. Embrace this. Glean the gold from it. Make the best of it, not just rolling over, but find the good in it. Find the good. Stay with it long enough to find the good, because once we find the good, this is our key to rise above and move beyond.
Again, amazing stuff. Yeah, I'm so grateful to be talking with you on these things. Thank you. This is always my favorite question to ask all of my guests. What's the biggest life lesson you've learned so far?
Oh my gosh, it's a good one. The biggest life lesson. Well, we've talked about many of them for sure here today.
It's been some good ones for sure.
Good one. Good one. One of the greatest life lessons I've learned is that there's always more to know. There's always more to grow. Just when you think you've got it, there's more. And with that is the idea that there's a power within each and every one of us. Like each one of us was born specifically, like I liken it to a snowflake, right? Like there's never the same snowflake that's ever fallen out of the sky that will ever fall again. Like when you look at your fingerprint, there's never been another one of you. There's never been another one of me ever in the history of human beings. And there never will be another one. And so the greatest life lesson to know is we're here for a reason. We're here for a purpose. And there is a power within us that when we tap into that, well, we have the opportunity to live our fullest and live our finest, live a life of fulfillment and live a life of joy and service. And that's one of my greatest life lessons, is that we are unique and we are perfect in our uniqueness, and that there's a genius that resides within each of us. And that when we are open to that, when we embrace that, that is the key to live the life that we were meant to be.
Thank you so much for sharing. As we draw to a close today, I mean, personally, I'd wish this would never end. It's such a great conversation. Do you have any upcoming projects or final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I do have some projects that are coming up, and it is about creating a greater elevation. So my whole purpose is helping people rise, right? And so some of the projects that are coming up, I do have several in the works, but one of them that I'm really passionate about that will grow greater is something that I have called the Happiness Project. And the Happiness Project is not just about that positive thinking. It's not just about, trying to be happy. Although it has to do with happiness, it is that calm confidence. It's knowing how to build the part of our brain that actually creates peace within our heart, no matter what's happening in the world. So this is about happiness, creating greater happiness, which creates greater health, which creates greater productivity. But more than anything, it creates greater balance and harmony so that we can have our grounding, have our footing, no matter what happens in our worlds, whether it's in our families, communities, business, or the world at large, how we can have peace, how we can live from joy, and how we can create that happiness within, even if this is the only day that we have to create that happiness. How can we live our fullest in this moment? And so I've created a happiness guide. It's some of my favorite steps and keys to create greater happiness, expansion, and greater light. It's about light, higher frequency, higher vibe, greater expansion. It's my 7 keys, and from that it will be created into a book. And it is part of the program in Elevate that I teach in group coaching and in private coaching. And I will have a digital program coming soon.
Excellent.
Do it yourself at home with Patricia.
Oh, it's brilliant. Best of luck with that. I mean, yeah, based on just our conversation today, I think people can really benefit from working with you. So I think there's a lot of I endorse this. I would say that. And
wow, Christian, thank you.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure just talking to you, learning about your life and what you do. And yeah, thank you very much for sharing your experiences and your time with us.
You've got it, Christian. And Christian, may I ask you, what do you have going on? What's next for you?
What do I have going on?
What's your vision, Christian? What's your vision? What's next that really expands your heart and fills you with joy and causes you such happiness in your heart? Anything on your radar?
You know, it's funny actually. Past couple of years, I got back into all of this stuff. I mean, in 2019, I was just working in my field of marketing. That's what I studied at uni, and yeah, I was just doing whatever. I was just working, and I wasn't unhappy, wasn't happy. I was just kind of in the middle. And then inevitably, that moment came where I was just kind of like, oh, and and everyone knows the story about from then to now, so I won't repeat it. But what I will say is that even in this last year, even in the last couple of months, I was so sure I knew what I was doing and where things were going and etc. And with everything that we've spoken about today, it's interesting because you can be so sure of where you think things are heading and what you're supposed to be doing. And then things kind of get flipped up on you. So to answer the question in a basic sense, like, yeah, I want to be an actor, voice actor, podcaster, musician, etc. I've got all these goals and things I want to do with my life, but I was getting so caught up on, I need to be successful, I need to do this, I need to do that, and it was just making me unhappy, to be perfectly honest with you. And I've cut some things out of my life now that were making me unhappy, and I've tweaked a few things and changed a few things. And the funny thing is, this podcast that I'm doing now, I started it with no particular rhyme or reason. I just knew I wanted to do a podcast. And I don't know what it is, but I feel like this is the thing that's, I don't know, because one thing I would love, which I think would connect with this, is I would love to make documentaries. I would love to create, content that would benefit a lot of people. And I think that I'm already doing that with this podcast to an extent, because when I first started it, I didn't have a particular plan in mind. I just thought, I don't know, I guess I'll talk about some things from my life. I can talk at length. And then I started interviewing people. And, it was as you expect. I mean, anyone can go back and listen to the older episodes. I wasn't as confident at talking to people, let alone interviewing people. And then, you keep doing it, get better and better and better. And then eventually things start to click and you start realizing what you're supposed to be doing. And, funnily enough, I had an experience recently where I was sitting at a pub in a bar, just having a drink, and someone was quizzing me about why I do my podcast and how I get my guests and stuff. And they'd had a bit too much to drink and they were kind of unpleasant. And I remember for a while just being upset about the encounter and everything. And then once I kind of stopped being emotional and just had time to sit and think about it, one of the things that kept coming to me is, what's the purpose of this? Why am I doing this? And I used to think it was, oh, I'm trying to be successful. I'm trying to, become successful. I'm trying to build a career. And all of that stuff is true. But, you have to have a bigger point behind why all of what you're doing. I mean, take what you're doing. That's your life. It's your career. It's what you're good at. But it's so much more than that. It's like you want to help people because you know that this stuff works because it worked for you and it's worked for businesses and it can work for people. And that's your gift to the world. That's how you help people. And it works. And it's something to believe in. With what I do, I guess I just want to entertain people. I want to inspire people. I want to make people happy. I want to bring that into people's lives. And I think that through acting and through music and through this, that might be my way of doing that. And, you know, every day is different. Every moment is different. You know, some days I'm more positive about it all, some days not so much. But I think when I started to relax a bit more with this podcast and just enjoy the process, it started getting better. Like, even, you know, just the way I approach this, like I've said this for the last 5 or 10 episodes, I've stopped even asking all the questions I have in front of me. You know, I see it more as like a guide, like this is just to trigger some stuff, but let's just focus on having a conversation with the person sitting across from me and just be in that moment. And that's an incredible feeling. And, you know, once again, I reiterate what I said before, which is, you know, thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge and expertise and, you know, just your stories, because people listening to this and watching this will benefit from this. I've benefited from this. And I think that, if nothing else, is maybe the most important thing. That's it.
Thank you for sharing, Christian. Thank you for sharing. You know, your future is bright, and you are right. You are right in the pocket. And the idea that we think it's going to be this way, and then all of a sudden a curveball comes in and it's that way. You know, I thought my future was going this way, and then I had a big curveball come in, and now it's going this way. And it is utilizing the gifts and talents and strengths that we have in just a little different way. And yet I will share with you in even a greater impact, even a better way, and even more fulfilling. It's just what I couldn't see because I was so into the success, right? Success, money, all the fame and the fortune and all of it that went. But wait a minute, there's more. And this is where we get the curveball, and hopefully we'll hear the call of the curveball that's redirecting us to what is really designed and primed and right there for us. And you are really gifted. You are very talented. And it has been a joy to be with you, Christian. Thank you for the opportunity. And I look forward to hearing from you again, and maybe even being together again so we can have part 2 and to see where we can go from here.
I would absolutely love that. And thank you so much for your time. And it's been a real pleasure. And to all the listeners of the Christian Reeve Podcast, as always, be safe, be well, and I'll see you in the next one.